the numbers in the venture capital industry are pretty one-sided. There's a new survey actually out this morning, like literally as we were heading over here, from the Information and the firm Social Capital surveyed top 72 venture capital firms, identified all of the people who make investment decisions, say 580, 89% male, 75% white. Changed very little from last year when it was 92 and 78. If you look on the other side of the check, the people who received the funding, another study from CB Insights, 87% had white founders, 12% Asian-owned founders, African-American-owned companies, a 1% sliver, which left Latinos as kind of a rounding error almost within that. 1% of all Latino-owned businesses in the country founded between 2007 and 2012 received venture capital or angel investments. Each of you, in your own way, have focused on these disparities, which probably aren't news to many people in the audience. I want to start by asking you, how has it become so lopsided, and what will it take for it to meaningfully change? Monique?
Well, I think that, venture capital comes out of finance. And so if you look at, other areas of finance, they are also tend to be very lopsided. Venture capital is a little bit of a newer industry. And so I think that we still have not done a lot of the things that other areas of finance have done to try to diversify their ranks. And so when it comes to venture capital, it's also very network and relationship driven. You hire an associate from the people that you know, or you knew a guy, and it's always a guy. Like you knew a guy whose son wanted to be a VC, and then you hire him as an associate, and that's how you kind of formed the ranks, and then those people moved up through the ranks.
So is it just a self-reinforcing network, Anthony? Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of the problem, right? To further Monique's point, venture comes out of finance, it also comes out of tech, right? And you have a cycle of the same people funding the same people over and over and becoming VCs and then funding their friends. And, it's something that we think about all the time at Kapor Capital and are working aggressively, to change, right? To invest in underrepresented founders so that they build businesses that consider problems, beyond the scope that where so much of Silicon Valley has been focused for several decades.
You're on the other side of the check. What's your experience been?
So this experience that these guys are describing is exactly what takes place, and I think what's inferred is it's somewhat of a passive process, because it's just inherited and it's kind of just where everything defaults to. But in addition to that, this default of homogeneity actually becomes institutionalized and becomes proactive. I think we've all heard the term pattern matching, which is taking this default of hiring your friends, seeing who becomes successful, and then repeating that pattern, and that becomes an investment thesis for every investor I've spoken to. And I think each investor may have a different definition for what that pattern matching is, but it is very firmly believed this is how you invest successfully and ethically, and that just further reinforces.
Well, let's drill down right there, Monique, because obviously this industry, the VC industry, with all of the problems that we're talking about, challenges here, they've made a lot of good decisions. They have invested in a lot of companies that have proven to create enormous value and change the way we live and work. Isn't it plausible for people to say, look, our primary goal is to do exactly that, and you are asking us to take our eye off the ball?
Right, but what about everything they've left on the table? So if you look at, and especially as the United States specifically, and as the world on a macro level changes, as the US starts to become browner, as Latinos increase their population, as African Americans increase their population, as Asians increase their population, and the US becomes less white and becomes a majority minority nation, which we are very much on track to become, you can't then say, okay, well, we're going to keep doing what we've always done because that's worked. Because as we keep going forward and those economic shifts happen and those demographic shifts happen, what was always working will no longer work.
Which gets to a big, broad question. When you're asking the industry to be more inclusive, is it out of altruism or is it a missed opportunity to be more
Well, I think you have to speak to people's pockets. And missing out on revenue and missing out on opportunities to make more money really speaks to people. I do believe that we have an ethical and a moral obligation to make sure that we have an inclusive industry, and we are bringing more people in who have different perspectives. But at the end of the day, we are here to make money, and I think being able to speak to the direct economic impact of being inclusive and of being more diverse is really important.
And do you see having a more diverse portfolio as fundamentally an ethical, moral obligation, or do you see it as a business opportunity?
It's a huge business opportunity. I mean, and to further, Monique's point, to bring numbers to the conversation, I believe, the Black and Latinx communities in the United States represent over $2 trillion in spending power, right? And if you are someone building a business to serve those communities, the investment community needs to be looking to fund entrepreneurs who are bringing products and services that, to those communities that better their lives, that are, sustainable and long-term, even if they're solely focused on making a buck, right? There's huge economic opportunity.
I also think this is a false dichotomy. I mean, sometimes, yes, of course, what may seem the most altruistic isn't the smartest financially, and vice versa. But a lot of the opportunity, it exists in the center of that Venn diagram. And by focusing there, I think we can alleviate a lot of the strain and pressure in the community, culturally, financially, institutionally, that we all feel like we're up against when do we do what's good and moral and what we believe in on a value, soft, warm, mushy-gushy perspective, or do we make money, which is what we're here to do?
I want to read you a quote, Jamie, that I found that you had in an interview in which you kind of elaborated on that point. You said, practically speaking, there are clear, well-documented disadvantages we face, particularly when it comes to raising money. It's a disadvantage to our community and society at large that sexism is still so prevalent in tech and startups. We are all suffering from this, not just female founders who experience it directly. Women are far more aware of the suffering because it's personalized, but sexism in Silicon Valley holds the whole world back. What do you mean by that?
So on a micro level, if we have a lack of talent, which is a big problem for most growing companies, it stalls growth and innovation and attracting talent. And we want more people to learn how to code. Now, what is going to attract more talent? Well, women will attract more women. Women will also attract more men. And so that's on a micro level. On a macro level, too, when we're looking at even beyond talent and also leadership and funding female-led startups and executives, all of the data shows that female-led companies tend to be more successful. So also women tend to hire more inclusively. Women tend to be more effective leaders and build stronger teams with higher retention rates. So this is good for everybody. I think that, once again, putting up these walls where they don't exist between altruism and financial success, between what's ethically right for the sake of political correctness and diversity and what's good for business and fostering innovation and financial growth, that's where our mistake is.
Yeah. Speaking of another false dichotomy, there is a big debate. Everyone kind of acknowledges the numbers, really, at every level of the industry, in the VC side, in the workforce of many of the big companies, and which kind of startup companies get funded, enormous racial and gender disparities. But the debate is really, is it the pipeline or the net, right? So there was another study in 2016 by the venture capital first round, and it found that when asked to identify the main driver behind tech diversity's problem, almost half of men surveyed said the problem was that there were not enough women and minorities who were entering the tech field, right? Only a quarter of women gave the same answer. So ultimately, is there a problem with the pipeline, or is it the problem the net at the other end?
I think that, largely the pipeline answer is a bit of a myth. Yeah. There are tons of really talented and bright Black, Latinx women engineers and STEM professionals coming out of HBCUs, coming out of state schools, coming out of even Ivy League schools every single year. And so it's an issue of where are you going to find those people? Are you going to Howard University? Are you going to Hampton University? Are you going to all of these places where I know that talented African American engineers are coming out of those schools and then going into like government jobs and jobs at large multinational corporations, but they're not coming to tech and they're not coming to startups. So what is your recruitment pipeline is the pipeline problem.
Pipeline or net?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think too much of the conversation centers around, diversity numbers at large, older tech companies that everyone knows, and not, the lack of investment in women and black and brown people at the startups who will become these large tech companies, right? And investing in people who are, understand the value of diversity and inclusion. From a cultural standpoint in the workplace, but also the significant, if you look at all the studies shown, as she said, that, companies that are more diverse from a race and ethnicity standpoint outperform industry medians by 35%. Gender diversity, they outperform by 15%. So it's like, I think we need to take the conversation. Yes, it's important to have the broader, large company conversation, but we need to focus on startups and investing in these founders who are building the future.
Parenthetically, you got to love a place where Google and Apple and Facebook are the rusty incumbents, right? I mean, that's just, but Jamie, just your thought on that. Pipeline problem? I mean, is there a legitimate issue in the number of African American, Latino, and women who are moving into the STEM fields? My colleague Emily DeRoy has written at The Atlantic the incredibly small number of black and Latino students taking, for example, AP science exams in many states. Is there kind of a self-reinforcing, perhaps a kind of a self-selection that reduces the pipeline?
So I think we're talking about apples and oranges, because yes, of course, there is a pipeline problem, and this starts in very, very early education, and it's linked to economics, it's linked to culture, racism, everything that plagues our country. There is also extreme bias where there are enough, yes, there are less, but there is enough talent in coming from diverse communities, and they're not getting hired. So I think we need to acknowledge both truths and not see it as either or once again.
Joint Venture Silicon Valley here did a study, and they found that in San Mateo and Santa Clara County, 2/3 of the people working in computing and mathematics fields are foreign-born. 2/3 are foreign-born. And that there's a clear upside to that this is a magnet for talent from around the world. But is there a sense in which this industry has found it easier to find the top folks from Mumbai than to create a pathway for kids from Oakland?
Yes. So there was a venture capitalist who I deeply respect, although I don't respect this quote. And he was saying, people keep complaining about this diversity problem in Silicon Valley, and I don't understand what they're talking about. We have people coming from Ireland, from the UK, from France, even some from Turkey. So, people really need to get more specific and accurate about what they're saying. Now, this is a certain, this culture is familiar, I think, to many of us, and he's not wrong. That's true, and we should see that. That's not the diversity problem we're talking about, though. And I think being able to acknowledge that, again, the scope that we're talking about when we think of diversity, some of that needs to be educated, and sometimes you have, one person talking about apples, another person talking about oranges, and part of that is making sure that we're all on the same page. Let's define these terms.
Yeah, I think one way of framing it that may make more sense to folks is not like a diversity problem, but an exclusion problem, right? Like there's a lot of diversity in Silicon Valley, but blacks and Latinx folks and women have been excluded, for quite some time, especially at the higher reaches within the organizations. And so I think, there are people coming from Turkey and Ireland and France, but there are, not a lot of folks coming from Oakland.
That's
something we need to change.
Is the ability to attract talent from all over the world a safety valve that reduces the urgency of creating pathways for? I mean, I talk. When I go around, we do a lot of events around the country. I've been with mayors in many of the most thriving cities in the country, and they all have their own version of the same problem, I think, which is here, which is if you're in Austin or if you're in Denver. In fact, John Hickenlooper, who is now the governor of Colorado, has called this the Denver paradox. We attract people from all over the country and all over the world because we're creating so much economic opportunity and we're such a good place to live, and we can't create a pathway for the kids growing up in our own low-income neighborhoods to compete for the jobs we're creating. When one mayor said to me, it might as well be happening on the moon. Right, and you could talk to Rahm Emanuel, and he will say the same thing about the South Side of Chicago or Seattle or Austin, and many places where this basic dynamic is true. That it's easier to import your talent than to provide a pathway for your own kids to get there.
Right, but you also have to then go into systemic bias and see what's underneath the hood. So if it was just that importing global talent is a safety valve. Well, if you turn that safety valve off, would that flip? Would you then be looking into Oakland? And would you really be looking at Atlanta? Would you really be looking at some of these cities where the population of African American and Latinx professionals is higher? I'm not sure that people would. I think you have to understand and get to the hidden bias that is underneath some of the challenges that we're talking about, because you go into some of these tech companies and you ask them about, did you go and recruit from Howard University, which is a well-respected HBCU, and they say, no, we don't want to recruit from that school. And so then you have to start to peel back the layers of why and what they're talking about when they say that that's not a school that they want to recruit from. So I think that it has a lot more to do with hidden bias or just bias.
Let me table let me table one more area before I bring in the audience for a couple of questions. When we think about, and this goes back to who gets funded. So Jamie, let me start with you. If we had a more diverse roster of companies and founders that were getting funded, would we just be changing the complexion of the people who can maybe hit it big and get rich, or would we also be changing the kind of issues and challenges and problems that the companies focus on? With a more diverse startup culture, would you have firms that were aiming at different needs in society?
I mean, you probably know my answer, but I think to the extent, if the only thing that's different between this new cohort of people that would be funded and the incumbents is purely just a shade of skin, then that is all we're doing. But if we're really seeing something deeper and going for something deeper and not just a shade of skin, and I don't think that that's what anyone amounts to. I think that often is a reflection or what informs so much more. Then of course we're fundamentally changing the culture and we're changing the entire economy.
Anthony, I know I've talked to with social entrepreneurs who say that a for-profit model is actually a better way to make change. Because when you're in a nonprofit model, you're kind of rattling the cup every year, going to foundations, constantly wondering about how you're going to keep the lights on. Yeah. But if you can create a business model around meeting a social need, you inherently have a more sustainable project. Do you think, as Jamie said, do you think is part of the goal here to change the problems people are attacking, or just the kind of, like I said, just the complexion of the people
as I said,
might get rich?
In the beginning, like if you're there are profits to be made, right, by building for black and brown people in this country, right? There are billions and billions in profits to be made, and so the market opportunity is there. What we need is investors to step up and fund these people, and that's what we're trying to do.
We're going to talk about more about this later, and I do want to leave time for questions, but I want to read you one quote from Steve Bannon, who is coming in at, the head of Breitbart.com, who is coming in as President-elect Trump's chief White House strategist. And he did this interview with Michael Wolff in The Hollywood Reporter a few weeks ago, in which he kind of really laid out their worldview and talking about how the globalists created a middle class in Asia while eviscerating a middle class in the US. And this is what he said. He had one sentence that really jumped out at me, where he said about Democrats. They were talking to these people with companies with a $9 billion market cap, employing 9 people. It's not reality. They lost sight of what the world is about. And whatever else we think about Steve Bannon and everything that he represents, does he have a point? Does this industry contribute enough to creating broadly shared opportunity? Or is it fundamentally about creating enormous amounts of market value and wealth without truly creating big employment opportunity?
I think we need to look beyond just, shareholders, stakeholders, which of course is very important as well. But also, our responsibility here in Silicon Valley is no longer just about profit and innovation. We are defining and leading culture, pop culture, psychology, society, religion, politics. I mean, it reflects it all across the country. And so I think that we're sending out a message. This is what success looks like. This is what failure looks like. And we need to take a hard look at how we want to represent those.
Sure, and I think that with the rise of AI and robotics and the potential to decrease the number of jobs for people, and especially in blue-collar jobs, I think that, Silicon Valley does have a responsibility to think really carefully about the things that we put into place. I think that, just because we can doesn't mean that we should. In some cases, especially when it comes to AI and robotics. And I think that it's really important to think carefully about the application of these products as we start to roll them out. And yes, Silicon Valley is all about creating efficiencies and increasing market cap. But how can we do that and bring in more people as opposed to blocking out and being exclusionary?
We have time for one question if we've got anyone in the audience. We have someone right up here. I don't know, do we have a microphone?
Right here in the back.
Oh, in the back, sorry.
Beg your pardon.
Okay.
My name is Becky Saunders. I work at a cable access TV station in Palo Alto. I would like to hear your perspectives. I'm a baby boomer, and I have watched the dismantling of the public education system in the U.S., I guess, since I became conscious of, fourth grade when they started busing. And I understand that if they had had open housing, we wouldn't have had a need for busing. But I have watched the education system here, the investment in our youth, trickle down to an embarrassing amount. And what can Silicon Valley companies do? Because that really does affect, you talked about eviscerating the middle class. I think an uneducated electorate, et cetera, is very easy to well, whatever, I'm just trying to get some ideas here about what can you all do, or what can we all do to promote that education that gives everybody a better equal chance.
Any thoughts? Yeah, just maybe add one kind of added twist. I mean, there was a lot of hope over the last 15 years that bringing tech into the classroom, personalizing lessons plans, allowing kids to learn at their own rate would overcome a lot of the kind of underlying barriers. Wondering maybe thoughts on how realistic it is for tech to solve some of the structural issues that produce educational inequality.
I mean, I think a lot of this has to do, again, back to the community. And if we're building, if this idea of inclusion extends beyond hiring practices, beyond fundraising theses and investment theses, and where all these tech companies and the individuals who work there, we're all just groups of people, are actually engaged in our communities and see ourselves as a part of it. And think very, very proactively about how we include the community around us.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, Monique, Anthony?
I think, being able to have access to the technology is really important. And so I see a lot of public school districts who just don't have the funding and don't have the money to have access to those products. So even though technology could play a large role, it simply can't because of budgetary concerns. So then how do we make sure that, kids in East Palo Alto have the same, have the same access and opportunity as Palo Alto proper?
Yeah, I mean, to further the point, it's not just about the budgetary concerns, but investing in ed tech companies that are gap closing, right? Not all ed tech is gap closing ed tech. Some actually increase disparity. So focusing on those companies that are broadening opportunity for the have-nots, right?
And to build on that,
importance.
On a very practical level, I mean, that really includes taking a long view and understanding that the return on that ed tech company, what it looks like in 5 years, 10 years, may not be what it is in the longer term, and the grosser implications and impact it can have financially.
Join me in thanking Anthony, Jamie, Monique. Thank you.
Thank you.